morning light streamed through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the grassy clearing. A sharp rustling noise broke the serene silence, followed by frantic, terrified squeals. The fox, a young, delicate creature with fur as red as autumn leaves, was trapped. Its body wriggled violently, trying to free itself from the jagged metal of the fence. The fox's piercing amber eyes, wide with fear, darted around in panic. The fence's sharp edges had ensnared its limbs, and the more it struggled, the worse its condition became. Blood stained its fur as the wounds deepened with each desperate movement. Its breath was shallow, and its once vibrant energy now only radiated helplessness. In the distance, the soft sound of footsteps grew louder. The rescuer had arrived, a figure clad in a faded green jacket, their eyes filled with both determination and concern. The rescuer approached carefully, mindful not to make any sudden moves that could worsen the fox's terror. Gently they spoke. "It's okay, little one, I'm here to help." But the words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The fox hissed, its sharp teeth bared, frightened by the human presence. The rescuer paused, heart racing. This wasn't going to be easy. The fox's fear could lead to injury, and time was running out. Blood was pooling beneath its body, a stark contrast to the green grass surrounding it. The rescuer reached into their bag and pulled out a pair of gloves, taking a slow step forward, determined to help, no matter the cost. But the question lingered in the rescuer's mind. Would the fox allow them to help? The rescuer's hand was close now, just inches away from the fox's trembling body. The fear in the animal's eyes was palpable, its body still locked in a state of desperate struggle. Despite the calm words spoken, the fox remained unmoving in its distress, its amber eyes darting to the rescuer's face as if searching for some sign of safety. The rescuer, heart pounding, knew that one wrong move could make everything worse. Each step closer felt like an eternity. Time seemed to slow, the only sounds the shallow breaths of the trapped fox and the rustling of leaves in the wind. The fox's body twitched again, its fur ruffling slightly, a sign that it was barely hanging on to the last of its strength. "I'm not here to hurt you," the rescuer whispered, but it felt like an empty promise in the face of the animal's terror. The fox flinched, its body tensing up once more. The rescuer's hand hovered above the animal, poised but uncertain. It was a moment of reckoning, an unspoken understanding that what happened next would determine the fate of the creature. With one final deep breath, the rescuer gently lowered their hand toward the fox, hoping that their presence would become a comforting force rather than a threat. The fox's struggle became more subdued, but it was clear that the animal was far from calm. Its eyes, though still full of fear, were beginning to show a hint of curiosity about the human that had dared to get so close. Was it trust? Or was it simply the resignation of an animal at its wits' end? Slowly, cautiously, the rescuer's fingers brushed the fox's fur, feeling the heat of the animal's body beneath the matted coat. The fox's body tensed, and its sharp teeth flashed in a final warning. But the rescuer did not pull back. Instead, they continued their gentle movements, their touch soft but deliberate. "It's okay," they repeated, their voice barely more than a whisper. The fox's fur was damp from sweat and fear, and the rescuer could feel the trembling of the animal's muscles beneath the surface. The delicate balance between fear and trust hung in the air like a fragile thread. The rescuer's heart raced. Would the fox bite, or would it accept the help being offered? Just as the fox began to relax, a sharp, jarring noise broke the silence. The sudden sound of a twig snapping underfoot from the forest edge. The fox's body went rigid again, its sharp, panicked eyes darting toward the sound. The rescuer, startled, quickly stood back. But this time the fox didn't try to flee. It simply watched, its chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. There was a brief moment of quiet between them, as if the forest itself had paused to observe this unusual encounter. In that stillness, the rescuer realized that this was not just about freeing the fox, it was about earning its trust. This animal, caught in the cruel metal of the fence, was terrified, and yet it remained still enough to feel the rescuer's touch. The rescue was not just physical, it was emotional. The bond was forming, fragile and delicate, but it was there. The fox's initial resistance began to fade as the rescuer's hand remained steady, its gentle pressure coaxing the animal into a sense of reluctant calm. Slowly, the rescuer began to pull at the metal fence, using the tools from their bag to carefully loosen the sharp, jagged edges. Each movement was measured, slow, deliberate. Too fast, and the fox might panic again. But the fear in the fox's eyes began to dull, replaced by exhaustion, and the sheer will to survive. The rescuer's fingers were sore, but they continued their work, inching closer to the fox's trapped leg. Almost there, the rescuer murmured under their breath. The fox's breath was becoming steadier now, and though its body was still trembling, it no longer flinched away. For the first time, it seemed to understand that the rescuer was not a threat. As the rescuer worked, the fox remained still, offering no more resistance. The animal's earlier panic had subsided into a wary but cautious trust. The fence creaked as it gave way, and the fox's leg was finally free. The rescuer's hand moved quickly to check the fox's leg, careful not to cause more harm. But the fox didn't resist. It simply looked up at the rescuer, its amber eyes softening as if asking for help, as if acknowledging the rescue. There was a deep, almost sacred silence between them, and in that moment, the rescuer felt a rush of relief. The hardest part was over. The fox, now free from the fence, lay on the ground, its body still trembling with the effects of its ordeal. Its fur was matted with blood, dirt, and sweat, but it no longer fought to escape. The rescuer, exhausted but relieved, gently stroked the fox's head, offering comfort. The animal's eyes flickered closed for a moment, its body relaxing. "You're safe now," the rescuer said, their voice soft and soothing. Slowly, the fox began to stir, its small, shaky movement suggesting that it was not yet ready to rise, but at least it was no longer trapped. The rescuer stood up and stepped back, giving the fox some space to recover. The forest around them had fallen quiet again, as though the world had paused to give them both time to breathe. The rescuer took a step back, their gaze never leaving the fox. The sight of the animal, alive, free, and still fighting to survive, filled them with a deep sense of fulfillment. The bond between them was unspoken, but it was undeniable. The fox trusted the rescuer enough to allow them to help, and in turn the rescuer had made sure that the animal would live to see another day. But the journey was far from over. There would be no rushing this process. They were both survivors in a world full of uncertainties, and though the fox would eventually regain its strength, the rescuer knew that their connection had only just begun. The fox had been freed from the fence, but its struggle wasn't over. It lay on the ground, breathing heavily, its body stiff from the trauma of being trapped for so long. The rescuer, kneeling beside the fox, observed its trembling form with concern. Every moment was critical. "You're doing good," the rescuer whispered, softly brushing the fox's fur, trying to comfort it, but deep inside, they feared the fox might not make it through the day. The forest around them seemed quiet, almost unnervingly so. The sun had risen higher, casting dappled patterns of light across the forest floor. But the stillness didn't ease the pressure building in the rescuer's chest. The fox's breathing was shallow, each breath quick and strained. "Come on," the rescuer muttered, almost pleading, not to the fox, but to the world around them. They needed to do more, but what? The fox's body was battered, its fur matted with blood. The injuries were severe. The rescuer looked at their surroundings, thinking about what they could do next. The emergency vet was too far away. They had no time. The only option was to make it to a hidden clinic deep in the forest, where a friend of theirs, an animal expert, might help. With a final glance at the trembling fox, the rescuer made up their mind. They couldn't lose the animal now. Not after all this. Gently, they scooped the fox up, holding it carefully against their chest. "Hold on," the rescuer whispered. Every step felt like an eternity, and the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Would the fox survive this next journey? They didn't know, but they were going to try. The walk to the hidden clinic felt longer than ever before. The forest around them grew darker as they ventured deeper, the trees dense and the underbrush thick. The rescuers' heart raced as they carefully made their way through the tangled wilderness, one arm cradling the fox close, the other holding a walking stick for balance. Despite the animal's weakened state, it had stopped struggling, its body limp in the rescuer's arms. It had exhausted itself, but the lack of movement caused the rescuer even more anxiety. Was it still alive? The rescuer's mind raced with questions. Every sound in the forest seemed amplified, from the chirping of birds to the rustling of the leaves beneath their feet. The path was treacherous, and each step was a gamble, but the rescuer couldn't stop now. The fox's breath was soft but steady, and that brought some comfort. But only a little. Just a little longer, little one, the rescuer muttered. They stumbled over a rock but caught themselves, the fox's body shifting slightly in their arms. The journey felt endless. They had to keep going. They could hear the distant sound of a stream flowing, marking the location of the clinic just ahead. Hope surged within them. The moment they crossed the small stream, they would be near safety. But even that small distance seemed insurmountable. The rescuers' legs burned with exhaustion, but they pressed forward, refusing to stop. The fox's survival depended on it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the rescuer reached the small, secluded clearing where the hidden clinic stood. The small cabin nestled between towering trees appeared to be abandoned at first glance. Its wooden walls were weathered, covered in creeping ivy, and the door was slightly ajar. A faint smell of herbs and old wood hung in the air. The rescuer didn't hesitate. They pushed the door open gently with their foot, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the clinic was modest but functional. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with medical supplies, herbs, and tools. The rescuer quickly moved toward the wooden counter at the back of the cabin, placing the fox carefully down on a worn examination table. The room was lit by a single overhead light, which flickered as the rescuer hurried to close the door behind them. They glanced around, calling for their friend, the animal expert who ran the clinic. "Lena!" the rescuer called, their voice shaky but urgent. After a few seconds, a woman with short dark hair and a green apron appeared from the back room, her face a picture of concern as she took in the sight of the fox. Without a word, she moved quickly, taking the fox from the table and gently placing it on a clean, soft cloth. The rescuer stepped back, breathing heavily, feeling both the weight of the journey and the tension that still gripped their chests. "What can we do?" the rescuer asked, desperation creeping into their voice. Lena immediately set to work, her hands moving with practiced ease as she assessed the fox's injuries. The rescuer watched, still too exhausted to speak, their mind racing with worry. Lena's face was grim as she examined the fox's bloodied limbs, her brow furrowed in concentration. She applied a mixture of herbs to the fox's wounds, murmuring quiet words as she worked. "This is bad," she said after a long silence. "But we can save it. It's just going to take time." The rescuer's heart skipped a beat. "How long?" they asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Lena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she worked on stabilizing the fox, wrapping its legs in cloths to prevent further damage. The fox remained still, its breathing faint but steady. "A day, maybe 2, Lena finally replied. "But we have to keep it calm. Stress could make it worse." The rescuer nodded, their hand resting on the table beside the fox. "What can I do to help?" they asked. Lena looked up, her expression softening. "Stay with it, keep it calm. We'll do the rest." The rescuer nodded again, watching as Lena continued her work. The bond between them was unspoken, but strong. They were both in this together. As the hours passed, the rescuer remained by the fox's side, never leaving the clinic. They sat in a chair nearby, watching the animal's every movement, even though it was mostly still. The fox's breathing had become steadier, though it was still weak. The rescuer's eyes never left it. "You're doing great," they whispered to the fox, feeling a deep, unspoken connection with it. Lena had long since moved to another room to gather more supplies, but the rescuers stayed. They didn't want to leave, not now. Not when the fox was still fighting. A few moments later, Lena returned, her arms full of bandages and salves. "It's going to take time," she said, speaking softly to the rescuer. "But I think the worst is over." The rescuer nodded, their eyes brimming with tears of relief. "Thank you," they said, their voice trembling. "You've saved it." Lena offered a small smile before moving back to her task, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the rescuer allowed themselves to close their eyes and rest, knowing that the fox would be okay. The hours passed in tense silence. The fox, though still fragile, seemed to be recovering. Its breathing had deepened, its small form no longer trembling with every movement. The rescuer sat nearby, eyes never leaving the animal, their body worn and tired from the days of traveling and worrying. Despite the progress, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The forest outside the clinic had grown darker, the sounds of evening settling in. The scent of pine and earth filled the air, calming the rescuers' nerves, but there was a gnawing doubt in their mind. They had been so focused on saving the fox that they hadn't thought about what might come next. Would the fox be safe once it regained its strength? The rescuers' thoughts were interrupted when the door creaked open. It was Lena, her face unreadable as she stepped into the room. She was holding a small vial, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There's someone you need to meet," she said quietly, her voice almost too calm. The rescuer glanced up, confused. "Who?" Lena hesitated, her gaze shifting briefly to the fox before meeting the rescuer's eyes. "Someone who might know how to help the fox further," she replied. "Someone who can offer more than I can." The rescuer's stomach tightened. Who could Lena possibly be referring to? And why hadn't she mentioned this person before? Something in the pit of their stomach twisted with unease, but they nodded slowly, unsure of what to expect. Lena led the rescuer outside, guiding them into the night. The air was crisp, and the forest was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. The moonlight filtered through the treetops, casting long, twisted shadows on the ground. As they walked, the rescuer's mind raced. Who was this person Lena had mentioned? And why hadn't she said anything about them earlier? They had reached the edge of the forest when Lena stopped. Ahead of them, a figure stood in the clearing, illuminated by the silver moonlight. The rescuer's heart skipped a beat. The figure was tall, cloaked in dark clothing that blended with the night, their face hidden in the shadows. They didn't move as the rescuer and Lena approached. There was an air of mystery, even danger surrounding this person. "This is the one," Lena said softly, motioning toward the figure. The rescuer hesitated, uncertainty clouding their judgment. "Who are you?" they asked, their voice a mix of curiosity and suspicion. The figure stepped forward, their face still obscured. "I am someone who understands the language of the wild," the figure said in a voice that was both calm and commanding. "And I've been following your journey." The rescuer stiffened. This was all too strange, too cryptic. "I've been watching your bond with the fox," the figure continued. "And I've come to help, but be warned, help comes at a price." The rescuer's stomach twisted. What price could they possibly have to pay for the fox's survival? Their mind spun with questions. The figure's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The rescuer stood frozen, trying to make sense of what they had just heard. A price? What did that even mean? Before they could ask another question, the figure stepped forward, their cloak swishing in the breeze. "The fox has lived through the worst," the figure said, voice low and deliberate. "But its survival requires more than just physical healing. You must understand the fox's true nature, its spirit, before it can fully recover." The rescuer's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you saying?" they asked, voice shaky. "What does that mean?" The figure's eyes gleamed under the shadow of the hood. "It means that this animal, this fox, has a destiny?" The figure replied cryptically. "It was never meant to live quietly in the world, you know. It has a place among the wild, and that place cannot be ignored. The rescuers shook their head, trying to comprehend. But I just want to save it. I don't understand what you're talking about. The figure paused for a long moment, the tension hanging thick between them. Then, in a voice that felt both ancient and wise, they said, "To heal the fox, you must let it go. You cannot hold it captive in your care. Its future lies beyond you." The rescuer's heart sank. The thought of letting the fox go, after everything they had done, seemed unbearable. Yet, deep down, a part of them knew that the figure was right. But how could they? How could they simply let go? The night seemed to stretch on forever. The rescuer sat alone in the clearing, the figure having disappeared into the shadows without another word. Lena had gone back to the clinic, leaving the rescuer with their thoughts. The fox lay in the clinic, still unconscious, but its breathing steady. The rescuer had tried to make sense of what the figure had said, but it was difficult. Let it go. How could they? They had come so far, fought so hard. Was it right to give up now? As the moon rose higher, the rescuer found themselves walking back to the clinic, their feet dragging in the soft earth. It felt as though a heavy weight was pressing down on their chests. The fox had become a symbol of hope, of survival against the odds. Letting it go would mean abandoning that hope. Yet in the quiet corners of their mind, the rescuer knew that the fox needed to be free, to find its place in the wild. But that thought was bittersweet. They could only hope that the fox would understand, that it would forgive them. As the door of the clinic creaked open, the rescuer entered, their eyes falling on the fox's still form. The weight of the decision loomed, but there was no turning back now. They had to trust the figure's words, no matter how painful it felt. The next morning arrived with a chill in the air, the first hints of dawn just beginning to break through the trees. The rescuer stood at the edge of the forest, the fox still form lying in the clinic behind them. Their heart pounded in their chest, unsure of the right course. The figure's words echoed in their mind, "Let it go." But how could they? After everything they had endured together, the thought of releasing the fox back into the wild seemed impossible. Yet in their heart, a quiet voice whispered the truth. It was the fox's destiny to roam free, not to be confined by human hands. The rescuer took a deep breath and turned toward the clinic. It was time. They walked back inside, their decision made. They would let the fox go, but they would stay with it until the very end. Until the fox was strong enough to walk on its own, to return to its place in the world. With a final glance at the fox, the rescuer whispered, "You'll be okay. I promise." The fox stirred slightly, as if understanding, before settling back into the warmth of the blankets. It was early morning when the rescuer finally returned to the clinic, their heart heavy with the decision to let the fox go. The weight of the night's events had left them exhausted, but there was no time for rest now. They knew the time had come for the fox to be set free. The clinic was still, silent, as they approached the door. Inside, the fox lay curled on a soft blanket, its eyes fluttering open as it sensed the rescuer's presence. The rescuer walked over, kneeling beside the fox. Their fingers brushed its fur soft and warm as they whispered, "It's time for you to go." The fox's amber eyes met theirs, and for a fleeting moment there was a shared understanding between them. The rescuer's chest tightened, and they swallowed hard, feeling the sting of impending loss. They had saved the fox, nursed it back to health, but now they had to release it into the wild. This wasn't just a rescue, it had become something far deeper, an unspoken bond that neither of them could deny. The rescuer could feel their heart breaking, but they knew it was the right thing to do. They had done their part. Now the fox had to find its place in the world, as it was meant to. Slowly, they stood and moved toward the door. The fox followed them, its eyes tracking the rescuer's every movement, as though it understood what was about to happen. The rescuer stepped outside, the fox at their heels. The forest was quiet, the only sounds were the rustling of the leaves in the gentle morning breeze. The light of dawn filtered through the trees, casting golden rays across the underbrush. It was a perfect moment, one that should have been filled with peace, but instead it felt like a final goodbye. The rescuer moved slowly, unsure of how to proceed. They had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, they couldn't shake the fear that the fox might never return. "I'll be okay," the rescuer whispered to themselves, though they didn't fully believe it. The fox stopped beside them, looking up with its wide, trusting eyes. The rescuer bent down, their fingers brushing through the fox's fur one last time. "Go," they said softly, their voice breaking slightly. The fox hesitated, its body trembling for a moment, as if unsure of what to do. The rescuer felt their heart pound in their chest, waiting for the fox's decision. The fox took a step forward, then another, and then, with a final glance at the rescuer, it disappeared into the woods. The rescuer stood motionless, watching the fox's form blend into the shadows of the forest. A sense of loss washed over them, a heaviness that seemed to sink deep into their bones. It felt as though their heart had been left behind with the fox, lost in the woods. The rescuer stood there for a long moment, unable to move, unable to tear their eyes away from the place where the fox had vanished. They had done what was best, what was right, but it didn't make the parting any easier. The sun began to rise higher, and the forest started to come alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. Yet, all the rescuer could hear was the echo of the fox's departure, the absence of its small, fragile body next to them. For a moment, the world seemed still, the weight of the loss pulling everything into silence. They took a shaky breath, trying to steady themselves. "Goodbye," they whispered, though the words felt too small, too insignificant for what they were feeling. The world around them felt both vast and empty, without the fox by their side. The rescuer turned and made their way back toward the clinic, each step feeling heavier than the last. The quiet of the forest seemed to follow them, as if the trees themselves were mourning the loss of the fox. But as they walked, something inside them began to shift. The sense of emptiness that had taken root in their chest slowly began to ease. They had done the right thing. They had given the fox the chance to live freely in the wild, just as it was meant to. They hadn't kept it trapped, despite how much they wanted to. They had let it go. The rescuer took a deep breath, trying to push away the lingering sorrow. They had saved the fox. They had given it a chance at life. And in doing so, they had learned something about themselves. They were capable of more than they had thought. They had been afraid, yes, but now, there was only a quiet strength that filled the void left behind. The journey wasn't over. It had just changed. The rescuer didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for sure: they had made a difference. The rescuer arrived back at the clinic, the door creaking softly as they entered. The building felt quieter now, emptier without the fox's presence. But there was a strange peace in the silence. The rescuer moved to the window, gazing out at the forest. The day was bright, the sky clear, and the forest stretched out before them, wild and free. They thought of the fox, now somewhere out there, finding its way through the woods, living as it was meant to. A sense of pride filled their heart. The fox had survived, had been given the chance to live freely, and though they would never forget the bond they had shared, they knew the fox place was not here with them. It had found its freedom, and in doing so, the rescuer had found their own. It was a quiet victory, but a victory nonetheless. The rescuer exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into a peaceful resolution. The door was now open, both for the fox and for themselves. The journey had come full circle, and now, it was time to move forward. The morning air felt crisp, almost sharp against the rescuer's skin. The clinic was quiet, a calm before the storm. But inside, the rescuer's mind raced. The decision had been made, and the fox was free. But something was wrong. There had been no sign of the fox since its departure into the woods, no sign of life where it had disappeared into the wild. It should have been a peaceful moment, the rescuer's heart light with the knowledge that they had done the right thing. But doubt gnawed at their insides. Had they really done enough? Should they have stayed longer? The rescuers shook their head, pushing the thoughts away. They couldn't go back. Not now. The forest had to take its course. But the more they thought about it, the more the worry settled in. The world outside had seemed still, almost untouched by time, but now, Everything felt like it was moving too fast, too urgently. The rescuer had always prided themselves on their resolve, but today there was an edge of panic creeping in. Were they doing enough? Was the fox really free? The forest, though beautiful, was vast, and the rescuer couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility weighing down on them. As they stood by the window, gazing out into the trees, the air seemed to grow even colder, as if the world around them was shifting in response to their uncertainty. The rescuer decided to venture out once more. The forest had been silent for too long. The trees whispered in the wind, but there was no sound of the fox, no indication that it was alive, safe, or thriving. With each step, their resolve began to break down. The woods were vast and full of hidden dangers, and they had no way of knowing where the fox might have gone. But they couldn't turn back now. The rescuer walked through the thick underbrush, their boots crunching softly on the fallen leaves beneath them. Each footfall seemed to echo louder than the last, as if the forest itself were listening. With every passing moment, the rescuer's anxiety deepened. What if they never found the fox? What if it was too late? They pressed on, pushing past brambles and tangled vines, their chests tight with worry. The forest was alive, yet it felt like a shadow of itself, each tree and leaf seeming to watch, waiting for something to happen. The rescuer's heart raced, but they kept moving, determined not to let the fox slip away into the wilderness without a trace. The silence was deafening, and their thoughts grew more frantic with every step. Just as the rescuer began to lose hope, they heard it, a faint rustling in the underbrush. Their hearts skipped a beat, and for a moment they thought it was just the wind. But then, there it was again, the unmistakable sound of movement. The rescuers stopped in their tracks, holding their breath. Was it the fox? Could it be? Their feet moved cautiously toward the sound, each step deliberate, the tension mounting with every passing second. The forest was still, the only sound now the crunch of their boots against the forest floor and the rustling ahead. The rescuer's mind raced. Was it the fox, or was it something else? The air around them felt thick, the weight of anticipation pressing down. Then suddenly, they saw a flash of movement through the branches, a glimpse of reddish fur, unmistakable. The rescuer's pulse quickened. There, in the distance, was the fox, moving cautiously through the underbrush, its body thinner than before, but still strong. It was alive. It had made it. Relief flooded through the rescuer's body like a wave. They took a tentative step forward, but the fox, sensing their presence, froze. Its amber eyes locked onto theirs. The moment stretched out in silence, the rescuer not sure whether to approach or wait. The fox, still wary but no longer fearful, stood its ground, and in that moment, the rescuer understood that the fox had truly found its place. The fox's eyes never left the rescuers, the distance between them filled with unspoken understanding. The rescuer took another tentative step, their breath catching in their throat. The fox seemed to sense their intentions, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as if considering the rescuer's presence. The air was thick with tension, the forest holding its breath. The rescuer couldn't help but smile, though their heart ached with the realization that this was the moment they had been dreading. This was the moment they would truly have to let go. The fox's gaze softened, and with a final glance at the rescuer, it turned and bounded into the thick woods, disappearing from sight. The rescuers stood there for a long time, motionless, their heart aching as they watched the spot where the fox had vanished. The wild was no longer just a place. It was a home, and the fox had returned to it. The rescuers' eyes filled with tears, but there was no more doubt, no more fear. The fox had made its choice, and the rescuer had done what was needed. They had set the fox free, and for the first time, they felt truly at peace with their decision. The rescuer stood alone in the forest, the stillness settling around them like a blanket. The fox was gone, but it wasn't truly gone. It had found its freedom, its home in the wild. The rescuer smiled through the tears that still threatened to fall. They had done the right thing, even if it hurt. This was what love looked like, setting something free, even when it felt impossible. The forest seemed to embrace them, the trees towering above as if to say that this was where they belonged, too. The rescuer took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few days lift, replaced by something lighter, something hopeful. They knew the fox would survive. It had the strength and the wild heart to do so. And as the rescuer turned back toward the clinic, the path ahead seemed a little clearer. They had done their part. Now it was time to move forward, with the knowledge that they had made a difference, that they had given the fox the chance it needed. The forest whispered around them, and for the first time, the rescuer felt truly connected to it, as if their journey was only just beginning. The days following the fox's departure were quieter, yet the rescuer found themselves walking the familiar paths of the forest, feeling a deep connection to the wild they had never experienced before. Each step felt like a part of a larger journey, one that had changed them forever. The air was crisp, the sun shining down through the trees, casting a peaceful glow on the world around them. But as much as they tried to focus on the natural beauty, their mind kept drifting back to the fox. Had it truly made it? Was it thriving in the wild, free to roam as it was meant to? The rescuer had done their part, but they couldn't help but feel that the story was far from over. They had saved the fox, but in doing so, the fox had saved them as well. It had taught them about trust, about letting go, and about the unpredictable nature of life itself. The rescuer paused, looking up at the towering trees above, their branches gently swaying in the wind. In the distance, a bird took flight, its wings spread wide, soaring toward the horizon. The rescuer smiled faintly, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. They had no answers, no guarantees about the future, but they knew that life had a way of unfolding exactly as it should. The fox had found its place in the world, and so had the rescuer. A week passed, and life returned to its natural rhythm, but a subtle change lingered in the air. The rescuer's heart had grown lighter, free from the weight of guilt and worry. One afternoon, while walking along the river near the clinic, they caught a glimpse of something moving in the brush. Their heart skipped a beat as they recognized the flash of red fur, the same shade that had once been so familiar. It was the fox. The animal was a few yards away, its body sleek and strong, its amber eyes watching the rescuer with no hint of fear. The rescuer's breath caught in their throat. It was as though time had stopped. They stood frozen, watching as the fox moved gracefully through the underbrush, its tail flicking with each step. It stopped for a moment, its gaze meeting the rescuer's once more, and in that brief moment, something passed between them. An understanding, a quiet acknowledgement. Then, with one final glance, the fox turned and disappeared into the forest. The rescuer felt a wave of relief wash over them, their chest tightening as they realized the fox had truly returned to its natural home. The forest was where it belonged, and so too was the rescuer in this place of healing. They had done the right thing, and everything felt right in the world once again. The rescuer stood there for a long time, the fox's departure leaving behind a profound sense of peace. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink, the rescuer felt something they hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of completion. The fox had returned to the wild, and the rescuer's journey had come full circle. No longer weighed down by doubt or fear, they now understood the beauty in letting go. It was not just about saving the fox. It was about giving it the freedom to live its life on its own terms. The rescuers smiled to themselves, feeling a sense of deep satisfaction, knowing that they had played a part in the fox's journey, but that the animal was now free to roam the forest, to follow its own path. They turned to head back to the clinic, their steps light, the weight in their chest finally gone. The world seemed brighter, the colors richer, as if the very air had shifted in response to the fox's freedom. The rescuer knew that, though the fox's journey had taken a different path, it was forever connected to them. And in the end, that was enough. As the days passed, the rescuer found themselves returning to the forest more often, each visit a reminder of the journey they had shared with the fox. They still visited the clearing by the river, where the memories of the fox's brief return lingered in the air like a soft echo. The forest had become their sanctuary, a place where they could reflect and reconnect with the wild. On one of these quiet afternoons, while sitting by the river, the rescuer heard a soft rustling nearby. They turned to find a small animal, perhaps a rabbit or another creature, emerging from the underbrush. It was a reminder that life, even in its most fragile form, continued to thrive in the forest. The rescuers smiled, knowing that they had played a role in preserving that life. They had protected the fox, and in doing so, they had helped preserve a piece of the wild itself. This knowledge filled them with a sense of pride, a deep understanding that their actions had ripple effects, far beyond what they could see. As the sun began to set, casting the sky in brilliant colors, the rescuers stood, their heart full of gratitude for the journey they had taken, one that had brought them closer to nature, to themselves, and to the understanding of true freedom. It was a few weeks later when the rescuer woke up early one morning to the sound of birds calling in the distance. The sun was still low in the sky, and the forest was alive with the sounds of the early morning chorus. The rescuer stood by the window, taking in the peaceful beauty of the world outside. The air was cool, fresh with the scent of pine and damp earth. The rescuer had long since accepted that their journey with the fox was over, but it had left an indelible mark on their soul. They had learned that true freedom came with trust, that the hardest part of love was sometimes knowing when to let go. And as they gazed out at the forest, they felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing that they had given the fox the greatest gift it could have, its freedom. The world outside seemed full of possibility, and the rescuer was ready for whatever came next. With a final glance at the forest, the rescuer took a deep breath and stepped outside, knowing that life, like the wild, was ever-changing, but always full of hope. The morning sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden rays across the forest floor as the rescuer stood at the edge of the woods. In the distance, the trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the forest hummed with life. Today was the day. The rescuer had been here before, but now there was something different in the air. A sense of closure, a finality, hung heavy on their heart. It was time to say goodbye. The fox had come and gone, and though it had found its place in the wild, the rescuer's journey was not over. Today marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. They had walked these paths many times before, but this time, the forest felt quieter, more intimate. The rescuer's chest tightened, but there was no regret. There had been no better decision than letting the fox go. Still, it was hard to leave the familiar behind. The trees, the river, the very air around them held memories, moments of triumph and heartache. But it was time to move forward. They knew that in the deep, wild forest, a new beginning was waiting for them, just as it had been waiting for the fox. And with that, they took one last lingering glance at the forest that had given them so much. It was time to step forward and let the past rest in peace. The rescuer began their walk down the familiar trail that led through the forest, each step carrying the weight of everything that had happened. There was a bitter sweetness to it, as though every tree, every rustle of the leaves was a silent reminder of the past. But with each step, they felt lighter. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine and earth. The forest was still, yet alive with the hum of nature, birds chirping, the rustling of leaves in the gentle wind. They moved forward, not in haste, but with purpose. The rescuer had known from the very first moment they had discovered the fox trapped in the fence that they were meant to walk this path. It had never been easy, but it had always been the right choice. The journey wasn't just about the fox. It was about learning to trust, to let go, and to accept the lessons the wild had to offer. As the rescuer reached the edge of the forest, they paused, taking a deep breath, and for the first time, they felt no hesitation. They were ready for whatever came next, knowing they had given everything they could to the fox. And in return they had found a piece of themselves that had always been waiting to be discovered. Wah! As the rescuer reached the clearing by the river, a place where they had often sat in solitude, they stopped and looked out at the flowing water. It was here that their journey had started, where they had first discovered the fox, and now, It felt like it was where it was all coming to an end. But there was no sadness in their heart, only gratitude. They had learned so much about the resilience of life, about the delicate balance between holding on and letting go. The sound of the river rushing over rocks filled the air, its rhythm steady and calming. The rescuer sat down by the water's edge, feeling the cool breeze against their face. Their thoughts drifted to the fox, to the bond they had shared. And yet, as the fox had moved on, so too had they. The world was a place of endless change, and they had come to accept that. The rescuer smiled softly, feeling a deep connection to the river, to the land, and to everything that had brought them here. They understood now. Sometimes you must let go of the things you love most to truly set them free. And in doing so, you find freedom for yourself too. As the days continued to pass, the rescuer found themselves returning to the clinic with a new sense of purpose. The weight of the past had been lifted, and there was a clarity now in the way they moved through the world. The clinic, once a place of healing for the fox, now became a place where the rescuer could focus on helping others. There were more animals to care for, more creatures that needed protection. It wasn't the same as the bond they had shared with the fox, but it was still meaningful, still important. The rescuer spent hours working with each animal, their hands steady and sure. The knowledge gained from their journey with the fox now shaping their every action. They had found a new way to help the world, and it was a way that felt deeply fulfilling. The rescuer knew that their work was not finished, that there would always be more to do, but they no longer felt burdened by it. They had discovered the beauty of letting go and the strength that came from trusting the natural flow of life. Each day, they felt more connected to the forest, to the animals they cared for, and to the world around them. And with each passing day, they felt a little more whole. The rescuer stood at the door of the clinic one evening, the sun setting behind them, casting long shadows across the land. The wind had shifted, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, and in the distance, the forest seemed to call to them once more. The journey with the fox had shaped their life in ways they could never have imagined, and now they stood on the threshold of something new. There would be more challenges, more lessons, but they were ready for them. They had learned to trust, to let go, and to embrace the unknown. The world outside the clinic was vast, filled with endless possibilities, and for the first time, the rescuer felt truly at peace. The fox had found its place in the wild, and so had they. They were no longer tethered by fear or doubt. The rescuer smiled softly, feeling the wind brush against their face. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to face it, one step at a time. They closed the door behind them, the soft sound of the latch clicking shut, and walked out into the night, ready to embrace whatever the next chapter held.